When you think about China and Myanmar's military junta, the word allies probably comes to mind, right? But what if that's not really the full picture? What if the reality is way more complicated? A relationship that's built less on trust and more on a really high-stakes strategic rivalry. Okay, let's get into it. Right off the bat, here's the central puzzle that kind of turns everything we think we know on its head. On the border, China is actively arming rebel groups that are in an open shooting war with the very same military government that China is supposed to be supporting. So what is going on here? This one question really gets to the true nature of this relationship. So to really get why China's making these moves, we first have to understand just how incredibly important Myanmar is to Beijing. It's not just another country on its border. For China, Myanmar is a strategic gateway, maybe the strategic gateway that could solve one of its biggest, most persistent geopolitical problems. Okay, look at this, because it really shows you the heart of China's dilemma. Geopolitically, China is pretty boxed in. To its east and south, all its vital shipping lanes are surrounded by rivals and potential choke points, especially the Malacca Strait. A blockade there would be catastrophic. But the Myanmar land route, well, that's the ultimate prize. It's a direct, secure pipeline for oil, gas, and trade straight to the Indian Ocean, completely bypassing all those vulnerable sea lanes. And believe me, this isn't just some idea on a mat. China has poured billions and billions of dollars into making this happen. We're talking about massive, real-world projects, the Kyaukphyu deep-sea port, huge oil and gas pipelines that run all the way to Kunming in China, and the whole thing is called the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, which is a massive pillar of its global Belt and Road initiative. China has a huge stake in making sure its stuff in Myanmar is safe. But here's the thing. This strategy of, playing both sides, it didn't just happen overnight. To really understand what's going on today, you have to look back. Because the origins of this whole situation are rooted in decades of history. This is where China learned how to play its double game. This has literally been China's playbook for over 70 years. It started back in the 50s, when defeated nationalist forces used Myanmar as a base to attack mainland China. That made the border a huge security threat. So in the 60s, China hit back by backing the Communist Party of Burma against an anti-Chinese government. But then, in 1989, when it wasn't useful anymore, China just dropped them. It was a perfect example of national interest being way more important than ideology. And here's the crucial part. When that Communist Party fell apart and splintered into all these different ethnic armies we see today, China kept those relationships alive. It turned them into a permanent insurance policy. And this right here, this is the core of their entire strategy. It's brilliant, in a way. Publicly, Beijing is all about diplomatic support and big economic deals with whoever's in charge in the capital. But behind the scenes, it keeps the lines open and the funding and weapons flowing to the ethnic armies along its border. This gives China leverage, a buffer zone, and the ability to basically turn up the heat on the central government anytime its interests are threatened. And boy, have those interests been threatened recently. This brings us right up to the present day, where a really bizarre problem, we're talking massive cybercrime operations, has forced China to cash in that insurance policy in a big, dramatic way. So let's talk about these scam centers. I mean, we're not talking about a couple of guys in a basement. These were huge, industrial-scale criminal enterprises set up in border towns like Laoqing. Their entire business model was running sophisticated cyber scams, things like fraud, hacking, you name it. And they were specifically targeting Chinese citizens and companies. And the word on the street was they were doing it all with the protection of the local military junta. So naturally, China went to the junta and said, hey, shut these things down. But the junta, which was allegedly making a lot of money off these scams, didn't do much. So China, completely fed up, played its ace. It activated its proxies, a coalition of ethnic armies called the Three Brotherhood Alliance. They then launched a massive military offensive, Operation 1027. Now, the stated goal was to wipe out the scam centers, but in the process, they ended up seizing huge chunks of territory. And you don't have to take my word for it. The proof comes directly from the junta itself. A spokesperson for the Myanmar military went on the record with this claim, openly blaming their own losses on the fact that these rebel groups were suddenly armed to the teeth with sophisticated Chinese weapons. That's a direct accusation from one supposed ally to another. It just lays the whole reality of the situation bare. So here's the bottom line. The scam centers gave China the perfect excuse, but the strategic goal was way bigger. By backing the rebels' attack, China also made sure that its key proxy forces took control of the land right around its vital oil and gas pipelines. Think about that. It's a stunning move. China basically decided it trusts these armed rebel groups to project its multi-billion-dollar investments more than it trusts Myanmar's own national army.
But of course, China isn't the only major power on this chessboard. All this friction between Beijing and the junta has created a huge strategic opening for another giant neighbor, India. And believe me, India is playing its own very complex game in Myanmar.
This slide really shows you the competing visions for Myanmar's future. On one side, you've got China pushing its economic corridor to Kyaukphyu port. But then you look over at what India's doing. They're aggressively building their own routes to counter China's influence, like the Caledon project connecting to Sitwe port. And it's not just them. Even Russia's getting involved, helping to develop another port further south. It's clear Myanmar has become this critical arena where all these major powers are scrambling for their own secure path to the Indian Ocean.
For India, the stakes here are incredibly high. The fact that the junta is angry with China is a golden opportunity for New Delhi to get closer and gain an edge. But just like China, India's finding out that it can't just deal with the central government. It also has to work with armed groups like the Arakan army to make sure its own massive projects are safe. On top of all that, it needs the Myanmar military's cooperation to fight insurgent groups that cause trouble in its own sensitive northeast region. It's an unbelievably delicate balancing act.
So, when you pull all these pieces together, the history, the pipelines, the online scams, the geopolitical competition, what's the final picture? Well, it's a relationship that's defined by a really high-stakes, deeply pragmatic balancing act from all sides. So let's just quickly break down the key takeaways. First, forget the word alliance. This is a transactional rivalry where national interest is the only thing that matters. Second, China's double game is its #1 tool for keeping control. Third, the junta's main survival strategy is to just play these big powers off against each other. And finally, all of this chaos isn't just a local problem. It directly threatens the security of economic lifelines that are critical for pretty much all of Asia. And that really leaves us with one final big question. In this incredibly complicated web of proxy forces, competing projects, and pure self-interest, can any single power ever truly control Myanmar, or is its destiny just to remain Asia's permanent strategic battleground for decades to come?